Hello everybody, and hello to all the students turning in from across Europe, Latin, Greece and Italy. We are here to pursue essentially two main goals. The first one is to improve the recognition for everybody that circular cities are really at the center of the energy transition. And the second purpose we would like to pursue is that we should all share that youngers can be really the players, the key players in supporting our vision that circular cities will be really key in order to achieve what we would like to have. So a better world, a more sustainable world where the environment and the social aspects are all taken care of. And in this connection at Enel, we really believe that redesigning the cities on the basis of a model of circular economy is what will be actually making our quality of life becoming better and better. And in this respect, the role of the new generations, especially the Generation Z, is really what we believe can be the game changer, because it is the new generations that will be really empowering, in a way, the transition, believing that adopting an economy, a circular economy model in redefining all the pillars of a city's organization is really where we can create social value before everything. Let me spend a few words about PlayEnergy. We are here because we have been also in the past seeing how youngest can be creative, can contribute innovations. We have been involving so far more than 20,000 youngest in producing projects, in giving the contributions to the innovation, and this has more and more to do with the development of ideas, of visions around the concept of circular cities. And this is what PlayEnergy is about. It has to do with working together in learning from each other, in putting together different knowledges so that we can all converge towards a vision which is essentially that circular cities should become the paradigm, the model around which we should build a new society, more inclusive, more respectful of the environment. This means that all the elements of the system, or the ecosystems, from citizens to companies to non-profit organizations, should really all together work in order to produce ideas, to produce projects, to give their own vision, so that everything can really contribute to make our world better. So, thanks a lot to all our distinguished guests. And let's get started. And bravo to all the contributors, and I'm sure that the best will win.
Let's try again. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here to present to you our vision on the interconnected city, how to live in future cities. Can we start the presentation? Perfect. So, cities, chances are that if you are watching this, you live in a city, because the majority of the global population lives in cities today. But if you want to keep doing that or do that in a healthy and safe way, while not making a negative impact on other places elsewhere, we need to reimagine the way we live our urban lives. And I'll tell you why. So cities only occupy 3% of the global land surface. So that's very little, but they consume 75% of all global resources and produce 60 to 80% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, making them giant leverage points. We are currently fueling our cities through an extractive economy in which we take lots of resources, make them into products, and then dispose them when we're done with them. To illustrate, we take these raw materials from mines somewhere else to build our products and electronics. We feed our populations through these large monocultures that require lots of pesticides to keep going. And we need lots of land and forests to supply our buildings. Once we have these raw materials, we manufacture them into products that we ship all over the world until they come into our urban stores when we can purchase them and use them and consume them. And then sometimes we build these products that we cannot take apart anymore. You might recognize these as Apple AirPods. And then if we can't take them apart anymore, we get rid of them, we dispose them. And some of these materials end up in other places. So cities far extend their footprints. We take lots of resources, we make them into products, and then once we're done, we dispose them. And this is having a negative impact on the rest of the planet. It's causing global warming or climate change, extreme weather events, but also wildfires. You might have seen these pictures before of desertification, the soils that we cannot use anymore for farming, toxic environments, but also big heaps of plastics and flood events. And then think about air pollution. So the resources we use in cities, but also the negative impact associated with that, is not distributed equally. It is often already vulnerable populations or other ecosystems and species that are suffering the consequences first. And our cities are growing. So what you see here is a map of all the mega cities in the world. So these are the gray letters. And then if you see the red names, those are the mega cities that are projected to evolve over the next 8 years. So we are only going to need more resources and energy. So it is time to reimagine how we live in our cities and how we consume our resources. How might cities grow without crossing the boundaries of the planet and making a negative impact, while still having enough resources and being able to divide them or distribute them in an equitable and just way amongst all our inhabitants so that we all have enough? What does that sustainable future look like? And here is where I would really like to hear from you. So if you think about the city of the future, what is most important to you? So think about where you want to live in 2015. I would very much like to invite you to share your ideas with us, because we need to build that future together. We need to put a dot on the horizon, think about how we want to live, and then we can work together to achieve that. So either share that in the chat if you can, or share that using this hashtag, #MyFutureCity. You can tag us in it because we'd love to have a conversation with you. So we've also done some thinking about that city of the future. And for us at Metabolic, it is important that we connect more to our planet and to other species. Can we bring the nature back in the cities? Can we have green buildings with green facades where other animals and species and insects can live? Can we have more different flowers in the cities or plants? Can we make sure that we don't only have cars, but bring back nature in our streets? And can we have healthy soils so that we can always grow our food locally as well? And can we have spaces for other animals to live or species so that we can cohabitate? So living closer to our planet and nature, but also living closer to each other. Can we have neighborhoods that are safe and connected, in which everyone can have a house and live in new ways, and also like a cooperative house? Can we have other types of jobs and not work 5 or 6 or 7 days a week, but maybe have time to repair our products when they break, or think about growing some food together with our neighbors? Can we have other types of transportation because things are closer? Can we use bikes more? And can we get together and have more agency over the public land, such as what is now roads or parking lots? It is also very important, also in line with the circular economy that we'll talk about more, is that we connect to the resources we use. Can we build our buildings for a longer period in time so that we don't have to demolish them? Can we think about that if we have to take them apart, can we reuse these materials? Or can we use other materials to build our buildings instead of concrete, which is having a large impact on the planet? Use other materials like wood. Can we capture water on our roofs? And can we live closer to the food that we eat? And can we use less energy? And the energy that we use, can we get that out of renewable resources? So I'd like to ask, before we go into how do we get there, are there any things that we can share from the chat that the crowd has shared on how they would see the future of the city? So let's pause. So one of the comments here that is very much in line with the circular future is that it should be used, that all the waste that I produce can be reused by me or someone else. Yeah, that's a great comment. Another comment is we should focus on using more natural materials to build cities. Yeah, like wood, for example, and that can also be reused. These are great examples. But I want to hear more from you. So let's keep that conversation going, and always feel free to reach out to us, because we want to collectively build that future and then think about, and that's what we'll go into now, how do we get there? So this is a picture of the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte. As you might see, I'm calling in from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So he's our Prime Minister, and this is a picture of him at the UN Climate Change Conference last November. And what he said is that this is the decade of action. We know that we need to get to the Paris Agreement, stick to the 2 degrees Celsius, and we need to act now. So this is good news. At least everybody recognizes that we need to do something different. What we also heard a lot is that we have to do whatever it takes. So what's the what? So let's dive into that now, because that's what Metabolic focuses on. It's the organization that I work with. We are an ecosystem of organizations. So we work with governments and businesses and NGOs and academia to drive global systems change. And our mission is to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable state. And we are doing that with over 90 humans from all over the world. So we have lots of representation in our team. And we don't only advise with a consultancy, we also do lots of research on what that would look like with our institute. We build software tools to accelerate the transition. We have a foundation that is doing amazing work on Aruba in actually implementing solutions. And then we have a ventures arm, because when there's good ideas, we want to make sure that we can build the businesses and interventions that can support that. So one way of moving to a more sustainable state with the global economy is by going from a linear economy, like we saw in the beginning, take, make, waste, to a circular economy, beyond zero waste. And when we think about the circular economy, the first thing that comes to mind is materials, right? We can't waste any materials, but we have to think about a more holistic view, because we don't want to keep using materials that, for example, are toxic. So we look at that holistically. So we want to make sure that materials in the economy are cycled at the highest value, that all the all the energy that we used is built on renewable resources, that we extract water at a sustainable rate so that we keep having water, that we support biodiversity so that we make sure that all the ecosystems can thrive, and that human society and culture is preserved. And then also, of course, we want to live healthy in cities and also outside of cities. and that we think about value in other terms of just financial. So think about, instead of money, think about time, or spending time with your family, or having new knowledge, or making something beautiful. So we need to think about other types of value than money. So now I would like to talk a little bit about that action, like how can we do that? And I wanted to show some of the examples of our work with Metabolic. So bottom-up experimentation, working with other cities, so doing stuff ourselves, working with other cities, but also how do we scale our work up? Because there's lots of cities in the world, and we need to, address all of them with each other, right? So first of all, driving implementation and experimentation from the bottom up. So this is in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. This is an old shipping yard based in the north of Amsterdam. And this is how Metabolic started 10 years ago. The municipality had this land and it was very polluted. It used to be an old shipyard and the soil was very dirty, so people couldn't really live there. So what we had set out to do was to build a very sustainable working environment here with other partners. So we wanted to show what the circular economy could look like in practice within a city. So now, 7, 8 years later, it looks like this, and I'll show you a couple more examples of what we did there. So first of all, we reused old houseboats. So in Amsterdam, we have lots of these houseboats floating on water. And then when when they break or people are moving, sometimes they want to get rid of them. So we used these old houseboats and bought them for very little money, and then remodeled them and put them on land, so to function as places where small organizations could work. We, of course, what I was saying is that soil, right? Soil was very polluted. So what we did with the houseboats, that we connected them with a boardwalk, so that instead of walking on polluted soil, you could then walk from boat to boat using the boardwalk. Underneath, we planted plants that are actually cleaning the soil, because one of the things that we came up with is that we wanted to leave the space cleaner than that we got it. So we have plants there that are actually cleaning the soil, which is amazing. Then we wanted to experiment with high and low tech interventions, because the circular economy doesn't mean that it is very high tech innovation. Sometimes you can use plants to filter your water, for example. It doesn't need to be something very technical. But we also have high tech interventions, such as solar panels that are connected through a smart grid, so that these different houseboats can actually exchange energy. And we have an aquaponics greenhouse. So here on the left, you see one of these old houseboats. This is actually sawed through the middle because it was too big. So we put 2 halves and one on top of it, and that's where that aquaponics greenhouse is. Aquaponics is a really cool system in which you have a closed loop. So you have fish, and then the fish poop, the nutrients actually are used to grow plants. And these plants are then used in a restaurant that is on site. So what we're trying to pilot here is how we can feed neighborhoods, from within the city, without having to use these big monocultures that we saw in the beginning of the presentation. So this is really a pilot to see how we can effectively produce local food. And this is what it looks like. So I was talking about these boats being connected through a smart grid. You see that all the boats have solar panels, and that once one boat uses more than the other, they can actually exchange that. And on the left top, you see the restaurant. And this is a place where lots of people come every year, making it a very nice place to actually showcase what a circular economy is, because it's nice to see things in practice. Another nice thing that happened there is that it really became a catalyst for the neighborhood. So the north of Amsterdam is a post-industrial neighborhood. So there used to be lots of factories there. And what the Keuvel has next door right now is the most resilient floating neighborhood of Europe. So these are basically a Keuvel plus. So these boats are houses from people, and they're also connected through smart grid, and they are very sustainably built. So if you ever visit Amsterdam, please do reach out, and we'll show you around. So just some takeaways, because I wanted to share some insights with you that we got over the years. So one is that if we want to implement a circular economy or a more sustainable future, it's very important to share knowledge and create a tangible narrative by grounding a project in physical space, right? So really implementing something. It is important to use that experience. So what we saw with the Keuvel is that there's lots of rules and regulations in cities, and not everything is allowed. So if you try to do something like this that doesn't really fit the normal urban development, you run into a lot of rules and regulations, and also how to navigate them. So how to make sure you don't, you learn how to deal with them. So experimentation, it helps really test new technologies, and that doesn't always have to be high tech, like I said. So if we test these technologies, then we can use them afterwards and scale them up. And a living lab can be a catalyst for the surrounding environment. So if you have one place in the city, you might see that around it, other initiatives will start popping up. So this is really exciting. So this is implementation. And the Keuvel, the future steps for that is that we are thinking very hard with the partners on how to keep this place in the city so that we can keep using it as a place for gathering and showcasing what the circular economy and a sustainable future might look like. Now, so this is implementation. We also work with other cities to drive action and to share some of our learnings. And we work with cities across the world, not always on the citywide level, but we give advice on buildings. How do you build a sustainable building? We also work with municipalities and architects and developers to think about neighborhoods. How should we organize a neighborhood to be as sustainable as possible? And then also looking at cities and sometimes even city networks. So we do that all over the world. And we use a systemic approach because we really want to understand what the city looks like right now, then set a vision together, like the vision that we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. And then we know where we are, where we want to go, and then we can think about how do we get there? What types of interventions or technology or initiatives can we develop together to help get to our sustainable state? And then there's, of course, implementation. And we want to monitor, we want to set goals and make sure that we keep track of if we are actually achieving our vision for the future. So this is the approach we usually take in our projects with cities. Now, why is the systems approach important? Because cities are very complex. So if we really take time to understand where a city is now, this can help us give new insight on why certain problems happen and why some of these negative impacts are at stake. It can also help us where we need to start with intervening, right? So which interventions can help us achieve our vision fastest and most effectively? And we want to avoid burden shifting, right? So, and provide insight in the trade-off. So with that, I mean, like if you have these 7 pillars that we talked through, we don't want to use a material that is toxic to our health, for example. Now I would like to take you to Poland. So Poland is in the east of Europe, and there's a city in there called Krakow. And as part of a bigger program with 3 cities in Poland, we worked for a year to help them build a circular economy strategy to ultimately achieve a sustainable future. So we co-created these strategies with these 3 cities, and we worked with local partners to build driving groups. And I'll explain to you what a driving group is in a bit, and activate local knowledge networks. So taking existing programs and initiatives as a point of departure. So we talked about that process, right? So we start with understanding where we are now. So who should be involved in the project? We build a driving group, and that group is going to stay with us for the remainder of the project and beyond, because these are the people that are passionate about bringing that forward in the city and can also help us understand the local context and help implement some of the interventions we together develop. So in a driving group, we want to think about which community organizations should we involve, which departments of the municipality, right? Because the municipalities often have different departments that all need to be involved. Think about parks, or think about the energy and resources department, or urban planning, or economics. We want to be strategic about who to involve in the project. Universities, there's often lots of new knowledge already in cities. So let's involve universities as well. And then industry, right? So think about the construction sector and think about how we can involve them so that they implement sustainable practices in their buildings. We also dive in what is already happening, because oftentimes in cities, there's lots of organizations doing good work, and we want to make sure that we build on the good work and help them bring that forward as well. We also want to understand what types of funding is in the city and the types of rules and regulations we're dealing with. What sectors are dominant in the city and which resource flows should we analyze? And we'll get to an example of that when we travel to Rotterdam next. Which resource flow should we analyze? So we can think about the agri-food sector, the construction sector, maybe think about the consumption sector, right? Like products and electronics. So we look at these and then we do an analysis there. We want to look on how that is distributed across the city, and then also what the natural climate and the planetary conditions are with the city at stake, right? What we saw in the beginning, where is the city actually located? What's the climate and what type of challenges or opportunities does that bring? Now, this is one of the results of the current state analysis of Krakow. So what we see here is a map of the city, and this map looks quite one-dimensional, but it has many different layers. For each of the neighborhoods, we understand what the challenges are, what type of resources are available, and also how we can use them as an opportunity. So I've highlighted two different neighborhoods. So one is a green oasis. That's a neighborhood typology that is more situated on the outskirts of the city in this case, and already has a lot of green space. It has a low buildup. There's not a lot of people living there, but it has a lot of biomass and a lot of place to perhaps grow local food. Another neighborhood typology that we identified was the loop closer. So these become very interesting if we start thinking about interventions, right? So loop closer, Nova Huta was this neighborhood. You see it on the right of the map. So what this showed was that was a post-industrial neighborhood. So it used to have lots of industry. So we figured that this loop closer has lots of resources that we might be able to utilize in a circular economy. So maybe that's a place for a living lab, like the Keuvel that I showed in the last couple of slides. So we think about a current state analysis so that we really understand what the city looks like and what types of initiatives are in every neighborhood that we can work with. Then we work with the driving groups to set a vision, like we talked about. So where do we want to bring the city? Because we understand where we are now. Where do we want to go? And how can we measure that? So in the case of Krakow, this meant a city with circular urban metabolism. So looking at how we can utilize resources, a connected city with an economy of creativity and innovation, looking at how we can build new knowledge clusters around universities, a sustainable, diverse, and inclusive built environment that fostered resilient communities. So thinking about how we can build these interconnected communities, but also the types of housing we want to have, right? So can we, instead of concrete, use wood? Or can we make sure that we build houses for a very long period? And then finally, a city with a healthy ecosystem for all species. So a little bit in line with the interconnectedness to the planet. So can we make sure that we don't only build cities for humans, but have enough space to integrate trees and parks and places where the other species can live? And then we want to make sure that we can measure that. So we have these KPIs, key performance indicators, that we use to measure our progress towards this vision. A couple of examples, because if we know where we want to go, we know where we are, we can start thinking about interventions, and a couple of examples of what an intervention could be. So one is a technology to recycle concrete, right? So if we take a building apart, we might be able to recycle that. Black soldier flies that can process organic waste. So if we have lots of organic waste, can we then process that and make compost out of it? Or a new recycling program. Maybe we just want to think about how we can collect the resources first. In the case of Krakow, we developed an action toolkit to drive implementation. So there's 24 actions to kickstart the circular economy in Krakow. So what we did there is we had a toolkit with proven solutions, things that we know that works. We want to include all the stakeholders, and we want to have impact on achieving the vision. So the goal here was to also use these interventions to build new partnerships in the city while getting towards action. And I'll show you an example that we did here. One of the things that came up that the city wanted to start with zero waste public institutions and schools. So starting with the municipal government and thinking about how we can limit waste there. And then also making sure that we work with schools and have education around what zero waste is. So each of the examples had a section on where to look for inspiration, and also had some examples on where to find that. And then finally, going back to the map, we also helped them figure out where to land these interventions. So we see these different colored boxes. These are aspects of the vision. So if I want to start with a city with a healthy ecosystem for all, there's a couple of places where you can start. So we really landed some of the interventions and then also showed the impact that could be made with when that would be implemented. And this approach, and I will share the slides if possible, so you can have a longer moment to look at this later on. But this approach works because a few months later, the city of Krakow had officially adopted this strategy that we built together, and they started to implement the actions. So one of the actions they implemented is on the bottom. It's a point for bulky waste, so that people can bring their big waste objects, and they're scattered, like they're distributed all over the city. So that these could be reused. The city is applying for more funding to do a big program of minimizing waste at public events. So that's like the public institutions and making sure that waste in public space is minimized. And they want a prize with this strategy. So that's very exciting because Krakow, with this, can also be an example for the rest of Poland that doesn't really have the most progressive national government. So it's important to work with cities, and then they can also be a catalyst for other places in the country. All right, so what did we learn there? So there's no one size fits all approach, sadly. There's lots of different cities in the world, but we have to take our time when we build a strategy. We need to build on local initiatives and existing policy agendas so that we make sure that a strategy is very tailored to and will achieve the goals. And then each neighborhood can contribute in a different way to the goal that we set as a city, because neighborhoods are different. And getting insight in the material flows and the amount of resources that are available requires data. So having accessible databases really helps. Taking you to Rotterdam briefly as a last example. So we want to stay involved with the cities that we work with. So we want to really bring the strategy towards implementation. And that's what we did in Rotterdam, which is the second biggest city of the Netherlands. You'll see a picture here. So in 2017, we did a big analysis like we did in Krakow for Rotterdam, and then we zoomed in on the construction sector. So this is a material flow analysis. So what you see on the left is all the materials flowing into the city. So in this, it's construction material that we need to build new buildings. And on the right side, so I hope this is actually right and not left for you, we see what is being demolished, right? So one of the, and you'll see the big triangle, one of the things that we found is a leverage point is that lots of demolition and building waste is being downcycled. So we're not using them to build buildings anymore. We're now using them to be a foundation for roads, or we actually send it to landfill. So we saw that that was an opportunity. So now, a couple of years later, we have worked with them as well on implementing business cases for circular building hubs. So a circular building hub is a place where you can store materials where they can actually wait to then be reutilized in a new building. So we have a big model, it's called the urban mining model, that we can use to see where houses are going to be constructed or buildings and where they're going to be demolished. So we use that to match materials, and then we also applied it spatially, so to understand what is the best location in a city to store the materials so that we can repurpose them most effectively. Now, towards implementation, a couple of lessons that we learn, and there's so many, I could talk about this for a very long time, but going from strategy to implementation takes time. We actually have to, it takes a bit of time, but it still means we have to do it. So we start with solutions that have a high impact and are feasible. So if we know that it has a high impact on our achieving the vision that we want to achieve, and is feasible. So there's the right kind of funding available. We have the right stakeholders at the table. Then we start doing it. And having stakeholders together can also lead to new types of finance mechanisms and business models, because we're doing something new, right? So sometimes when you have interventions, they actually require a very new approach. Finally, so we talked about what we have implemented ourselves at Metabolic. We also talked about how we advise other cities, but there's a lot of cities in the world. So scaling up action through sharing insights, new ideas, and tools. So this is very briefly. We work with multiple cities at the same time. So this is through our institute. We combine cities to then collectively build strategy. So this is a project that is called Reflow. It is also building a tool, and it's a collaboration. It's funded by the EU. It's Berlin, Amsterdam, Milan, Vele, Cluj, and Paris. And they're very much focusing on one resource flow and then coming up with interventions. So bundling cities and having them learn from each other is something that we see works. Another thing that is very close to our hearts is building as many open source tools and knowledge as possible. So one of the things we're building right now is the Circular City Actions Framework, together with our partners, ECLI, Circular Economy, and EMF. And what we're doing there is we're trying to build an automated software tool so that every city can do a current state analysis and build a strategy. So that, this could be a municipal government doing that. It could also be a local partner or local organization doing that. And then we're also building a tool, the Circular Action Planner tool, that helps us see what new ideas there already are living in the city that can help us achieve this vision that we have. Then we spend time building capacity and communities of practice. So this is also part of that implementation phase. Sometimes we need to spread the word. So we spend quite some time giving workshops and making sure that the circular economy and what a sustainable future is lands in different companies, but also at schools and with other organizations. And then finally, we share ideas and we want to have conversations so that we can keep inspiring each other. So one of the things that my colleagues worked on is thinking about how we can get to a circular energy transition, which is a report I would highly recommend. And then I wanted to end with the interconnected city. So that's something that we discussed in the beginning of this talk. How do we want to live in cities? And I would like to invite you to keep sharing your ideas with us, because we need to build the urban future together. Thank you. And I see that there's lots of questions actually in the chat, so that's very exciting. I wonder, Georgia, can I just pick some, or will you pick some? Oh, I see them here. So I think I'll just go through some of these questions. It would be so much fun to actually have the conversation with you. So one, I see a question pop up. What's the single most important point to take care of in developing a circular city? Well, that's that's a great question. So that depends on the city, I guess. So one of the things that we try to figure out when we do one of these current state analysis, right? Like mapping the resources, looking at the organizations and looking at what issues are most pressing. We try to identify exactly this. Where do we start? What is the most important point to take care of in developing a circular city? But if you want to have some rule of thumb, you can always have these 7 pillars of the circular economy, because those give good guidance, right? Like we want to limit, we want to use our materials to highest value. We want to use as little as possible energy. Like prevention, I think, is probably one of the things we want to always to use less, use as little as possible, and don't waste. I think these are good rules of thumb. But then also think about the environment and the planet, and let's keep things livable. But yeah, it's a great question. I think it really differs per city. So figuring out where to start. What aspect of the circular city are you most passionate about? So another great question, because I'm passionate about quite some of it. I think for me, what is most important right now, especially, I'm sure you've all been in lockdown as well over the last 2 years, or in and out of lockdown, I am really passionate on bringing nature back in cities, or kind of not having the boundary city and nature anymore, but having much more space for that. I live in Amsterdam, and especially now in winter, it's a very gray city. We have plans for making more space for trees and parks and other species, or community gardens. But there's also a big pressure from the housing point of view. There's also this need to house more people. So for me, it's very important that we bring back nature into our cities, because that can help us with lots of our challenges. It can capture water, it can help our air be clean, and generally having more green space makes us happier. So for me, that would be my most passionate point: making cities for all species. A lot of cities in Europe have very old infrastructure. We have to preserve historical sites, even if they're not sustainable. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think about this a lot. Also, like walking through Amsterdam, because we have lots of these canal houses, and it's quite difficult because, if we think about that sustainable future, and um, not using a lot of energy, for example, reducing the amount of energy we use, that means isolating um, these houses, are making sure that they are not that they don't use or don't emit carbon, and that for some of these older buildings is not really possible. But then we can also think about those different neighborhoods, right? So maybe one neighborhood can produce more energy so that the other neighborhood doesn't have to produce as much, because some of these canal houses might not be able to carry solar panels, for example. I think that's a case by case. So we have to look at the building and then make an assessment. Can we keep it? In general, we always want to keep, like the first idea is that we want to keep the building, also because demolishing it is takes more pressure, right? Costs more energy, and also costs more materials. Um, and if that's not possible, we need to think about, maybe we can renovate, right? Maybe we can think of a different way of looking at the building. What they do sometimes is take apart the back of the building and then keep the facade, so the front, and then build another building behind it that is more sustainable. So there's lots of way of looking to it. Generally, if we look at the built environment, we want to make sure that we build buildings for the longest period of time, so that we don't have to demolish and build reconstruct. But if it's really not possible, we need to see if we can transform or do something else creative with it. Reuse the materials. Hope that answers your question. Will landfills ever disappear? Hopefully. Well, we have messed up a bit in the past, of course, and some landfills hold very toxic materials. What I've seen happen here in Amsterdam is sometimes they just wrap them up in plastic and then hope it disappears. What we can do right now is make sure that we don't use landfills anymore, so that we don't make any others. And then we probably need to start cleaning them up, and making sure that we clean the soil, right? So landfill, there's often bigger products in there. So there might be, and we talked about urban mining in terms of construction materials, but you could also see what you can get out of useful materials. When you look at the landfill, maybe there's resources we can use there and clean that up. But then still, we need to be very mindful of the toxicity that is related to that. So hopefully, but it will take some time. Ooh, this is a great question. Which European country is the most advanced in sustainability policies? Um, there is a bunch of countries very much advanced. Some of the Nordic countries are doing very well. Um, and I think mainly the European Union is really stepping up the game. So that's actually creating a lot of policy, but also funding from the European perspective. So there's lots of different programs that countries and cities can apply to. I would, of course, love to say the Netherlands, but that's just quite frankly not true. The Netherlands has not been doing very well. Hopefully, we step up our game very soon. Germany is doing a great job. I think there's a couple in the Nordics that are doing quite well. And then on a city basis, I think Amsterdam is doing a great job. Copenhagen is doing a great job. Tallinn is doing a great job. So So I think on the city basis, it's sometimes easier than looking at national politics. Lots of countries are not doing very well yet. All right, I think that was it. Is there anything else? No, then I think this was our session. It was really nice being here. Thank you for having me. Hopefully next time we can talk in person because it's still a bit strange to see myself on the screen while talking to others. Um, so thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in the future. And have fun with the rest of the program. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We can start now this moment to deep dive on another aspect of circular economy, focusing more on the role of the consumer, of the customer, if you want, for the transition toward a circular economy model. I know that you have already heard many deep dive about circular economy. I'm trying to add a perspective on it that I hope is can add, let me say, some new insights. I go through the presentation, and of course, if you have a slide, we can have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. For the question I will try to address in these minutes are above all about one more general about what the role of circular economy in addressing the environmental challenges of our society. Then how the role of product should change. Our relation with product should change to maximize this the potential of circular economy, and then a focus in the perspective more of the cities, trying to understand not only as a customer, but as well as a citizen, what is our role in this transition. I guess you are familiar with the issue of climate change. The point I wanted to highlight it is that there are many environmental challenges that we are dealing with and are strictly interconnected. So in the last years has emerged this vision of the planet boundaries. That means that the planet is facing many environmental challenges. Here are the 9 more relevant ones that are connected one with the other, and therefore you cannot solve one without impacting on the other. Due to this vision of the environmental challenges, the idea of not addressing isolated part of the problem, but to redesign the economic model in order to solve them all is the mainstream approach that is developing. The most known issue is the one of climate change that in the last 4 to 5 years has become an issue of concern at any level, and of course with the COP and all the discussion ongoing, I guess everybody hear about it every day. But this is of course not the only one. Concerning climate change, there are already many initiatives, many technologies under development. Here are just some examples: the photovoltaic, the wind, the electric mobility. Therefore, these are the first step that was addressed in fighting the environmental issue, the more relevant one. But of course, each transition is made up of many aspects. And as I said before, the environmental challenges are not isolated, but are strictly connected. So another aspect related to this overall transition is also related to the material side. I mean, what is the impact of the material we are using? Because of course we need to decarbonize, so to avoid any direct emission, but we can impact on the environment in many other ways. One, for example, is through the materials, because the last study project the fact that many emissions worldwide are due to the material we consume, like iron, steel, cement, plastic, etc. So this is a second aspect of the environmental challenges that is often forgotten. And this is a challenge that is somehow changing because compared to the past, the kind of material we are using are changing. I guess that most of you are familiar with the periodic table. That means the table of the chemical elements that are present in the world. If we compare the need of material that old technology had compared to the new technologies, here, for example, we see a traditional light bulb with a LED bulb. We see that many more material are used to make these technologies that use different physical phenomenon. And many of these material are, by the way, critical materials. So material that are more rare, are more impacting. This is true for most of our technology. If we go through the most known, maybe the phone, the smartphone, moving from the traditional phone that now has disappeared basically to the smartphone, we see that the number of material used increase many times, and often these are critical materials. Again, we see that in a smartphone, we use around 50 materials, and this represent a huge challenge, both in order of procuring all this material, but as well in understanding the impacts and understanding as well the end of life of these materials. Given this issue, I mean, I just mentioned some example, but just to provide the idea of how complex is the issue behind. The vision of circular economy has emerged in the last 10 years, more or less, in terms of a vision that had the aim to decouple somehow our economic model from the resource consumption. So this means both material consumption as well emissions. I mean, to have a model that do not consume natural resources somehow. And this is, of course, at the core of the environmental issue, because, as I said at the beginning, you really need to address positively on all the environmental challenges. So if you do not consume resources, you do not emit, you do not have emission, you do not have waste, etc. Circular economy is often used as synonymous of recycling in the newspaper, in the news, etc., but it is not so. So recycling is part of circular economy, but is somehow the last step of circular economy. Circular economy starts from the beginning, from how we design, what material do we use, how we use our product and asset. So generally, it is represented in terms of 5 pillars. Then, of course, the number of pillars can be modified, but basically the concept are this. That is the inputs, what material do we use, how do we plan the life extension of our assets? So how do we design our products? Because you need to ask yourself from the design phase what will be the recycling and the next life of the product, because everything has been designed accordingly. Then there are the part on how we use our assets, so the solution like sharing, like a product as a service, moving from the ownership to the use. And then at last, there is the new life cycle that can be reuse, can be remanufacturing, can be recycling. But it is really the last step of the circular economy perspective. And to share an insight on why it is the last step, if you consider, maybe this is a little more technical, but the issue of send products to recycling is positively environmentally, of course, but depends much on how much material do you recover, because anyhow, if the recycling efficiency is low, at each cycle you lose much of the material. So recycling is actually effective if you are able to achieve a really high recycling efficiency. And this can be only achieved through ad hoc design from the beginning. I mean, you really need to design your product in order to maximize the efficiency, because this is the only way to really keep all the resources in the loop. So this is a simple example, but show how critical it is, the role of design, even if we are speaking about recycling. Another important aspect to mention about circular economy is the approach. I mean, the customer approach, basically. We generally, the consumerism is considered a phase of the consumption approach that began after the Second World War. here there is a picture from Life magazine that was from the 55, that is celebrating the throwaway living. That means the possibility to throw away stuff, because there was the introduction of the plastic and all this material that allow to throw away stuff. It was seen as an improvement. I mean, because it was a show also of on one side of better economical conditions, on the other as well, no need anymore to clean, for example. So it was really an easier way of life. Of course, this approach has lasted for decades, and now we are starting seeing a change from this, because people are starting reconsidering this throwaway approach. Above all, I could say because we are now being aware of the environmental impact of what this has created in the last decades, because besides the climate change, as well the ocean pollution, or many other topics we deal with every day, show clearly how unsustainable this approach has become. This is emerging as well in the survey that are carried out with customer. So there is the evidence that the focus of customer is no more about this extreme consumerism, above all among the new generation. So, and there is as well a desire of having also a positive impact on environment throughout our consumption patterns. This is true in many ways. I mean, it could be about as well the sharing. Car sharing is a typical example, for example, or the local value chains. This applies as well to the food, not to all the slow food movement, etc., as well to the issue of avoiding waste. So there is a sensitivity that is expanding, and maybe now today the issue about it is if the sustainable approach should be more expensive or should be competitive. Maybe this is still something that is under discussion, but nonetheless there is a strong movement among consumers to push companies toward a sustainable approach, and a rigorous sustainable approach, because there is of course the issue of greenwashing that is a big concern, because it's not always so straightforward, so easy to understand if a new solution is actually sustainable or it is not. So it's really needs also to deep dive on the real impact that they have. Just to show a few examples, I wanted to mention what some companies are doing in this perspective. I pick example from company that you are familiar with. So one is about Nike. They have implemented design guidelines for themselves and for their suppliers, trying to address the issue of circularity from the real beginning. This basically is implemented throughout a set of pillars that concern material and energy they choose, the cyclability, the waste avoidance, the refurbishment, versatility, that means the possibility to reuse in for the different destination, and durability, I mean the actual durability of the stuff. So here they implemented this pillar that are the more useful for their kind of product, but the concept that you see now here are pretty much the same concept that are applied in any sector. And in this perspective, Nike, but as well Adidas and other shoes company are working, for example, in order to design shoes made of one single material, because this, going back to the example of recycling I made before, improve much the possibility of recovering material at the end of the life, because the more the material are easy separable, the more you can really recover and recycle the material. So they're really trying to implement this from the beginning, and they're trying to do it involving all their suppliers, because this is another important takeaway of circular economy. you cannot do it alone. I mean, you need really to involve all your value chain from the extraction phase down to all the step of each supplier to the next supplier in order to implement circularity throughout the whole value chain. Another well-known brand, IKEA, they as well are working much on circular economy. We often discuss the topic with them. And again, they created their circular product design guidelines. They defined their pillars, that is standardization, adaptability, renewable and recycled, care, repair, and recyclability, that are not exactly the same of Adidas, but basically the concept behind are the same. So everything goes back to the 5 pillars we mentioned at the beginning. IKEA was already considered a sustainable brand somehow, but they put a strong effort on circular economy, and they are also pushing much the reuse side of their product. So as well in Scandinavia, they have opened a store of Second Life stuff, the products from IKEA. I guess as well in Italy, they are doing something of that kind, and they are working much on the design, on the measurement of their products. Another example, like this as well, quite well known, is Patagonia. That is pushing much also on the consumption habit of their customer, because they are encouraging their customer not to buy new products, but to take care of their stuff. So Patagonia started the services to repairing the jacket or the garment, the products of their customers. Therefore, pushing for an approach focused on maintenance, on repairing, on keeping the asset and not on replacing this. This, of course, is connected as well to the fact that Patagonia is a high-level brand. So their product are a high-level product, and this is easier and more competitive to be managed. So they are quite away from the fast consumption perspective. These are just some examples that beyond the environmental benefits, that is quite clear, have also further benefits, because many of these solutions are not necessarily adopted from customers just for environmental reasons, but can have further benefits. For example, about saving, I mean, because you avoid buying new, or you can buy second-hand products. If you rely on local supplier, for example, there is also less risk of disruption in the supply. And there are other ways to improve to save money, because all the sharing, for example, goes in that direction as a product as a service. So also the success that car sharing is having in cities is also related to this, that at the end, according, of course, to the frequency you use the car, but it's an opportunity on one side to have less worries about your car, and second, to pay just for the use, not to have to keep something that you basically use 2% of the time. And this approach from the supply, from the brand, the companies can help also to have more durable, repairable, and recyclable products. For example, in France, it was introduced the law last year, for which the brand has to declare what is the level of repairability of their products, so that the client, when they buy a product, they know if they will be able to repair and how expensive it will be to repair it. So try to approaching the product in a life perspective, not in a throwaway perspective, as in the picture from the Life magazine of the past. And this can be as well an extra income opportunity in somehow, because also the fact that the goods have a longer life, can be sold again when you do not use them, could be also an opportunity of income integration somehow. Then more in general, the sharing economy that is a part of the circular economy. Sharing is about when there is a condivision of an asset between peers. This represents as well a social opportunity, somehow creates a new way of interaction, can be related also to interaction at the neighborhood level. So this is moving to a new perspective as well in how to manage the economic activities, and can also be an opportunity of saving, because basically people can start sharing assets, sharing time, sharing services. So on one side, improve the accessibility to services, and on the other, strengthen the interaction, the collaboration between people, above all physically in a location. I move now to the part that I mentioned at the beginning about cities, how this is relevant for cities. Just to give a framework about the cities, in the last years there have been many discussions on how cities should evolve. It was already ongoing before the COVID pandemic, and during the COVID, this discussion on the future of city has further increased, because of course, as doubts, discussion on the future of cities has emerged. But city basically we're already trying to understand how to improve the quality of life of their citizens. I mean, how to remain an important focal place of human life. I mean, why should people live in cities? There was a part related to the economic opportunity, the studying opportunity, etc. But there was also an issue on quality of life. So cities worldwide were trying to understand how to improve the quality of life for their citizens. And many cities have focused on circular economy as a lever to redesign themselves. Therefore, in the last year has emerged this concept of circular city. That has now become mainstream, and we are seeing this developing not only in Europe, but as well, for example, in Latin America, where there has been a strong focus on this in the last year, for example, and as well in US. So it's a relevant trend. Here I was, without getting into the theory on all the discussion, because of course it's beyond the time we have, but I just wanted to share a few examples of some cities, how they are approaching it. The first is Paris, that has created their circular economy roadmap, and at the same time has been one of the promoters of the 15-minute city concept. That is basically the vision that each citizen should have the right, I mean, to access the services they need within a 15-minute walk. So the idea is that you should have the school at 15-minute walk, the library, the hospital, etc. So trying really to redesign the city in order that services are easily accessible. And this, of course, could represent a strong shift, because this would stop the need for a car, I mean, or at least strongly decrease the need of cars, and would allow the street to be up to the pedestrians, to the people to use them. I mean, would push for as well a different approach to shopping. So this really is, so far they have just started, I mean, since 1 year and a half, but is an experiment that could really reshape the city. And then they are working on many other directions. They're working on the issue of waste, on the food, on the waste food, for example, that today represent 30% of the food that at the end ends up as waste. So in many cities, there are projects on this. And then, of course, there is a part related to roadwork waste, I mean, to address the waste in all this dimension. And of course, all the part also related to the bicycle mobility, etc. So Paris, in this respect, represents an important example, and above all is the fact that they have a vision behind. And this connects to the topic of the customer we were talking about before, because at the end, to implement circularity in a city, in parts depends on the institution, of course, in parts depends, of course, on the citizens, ourselves, and on the choices we make, both as a citizen and as a customer. Amsterdam is a leading example on this, because maybe they were the first to do it. They created their vision to 2050 on circular economy. They're trying to integrate the circular economy perspective as well with the social impact that it can have, therefore referring to the so-called donut economics, that is something that has emerged more recently, but that basically connects the environmental issue with the social issue, trying to address them throughout circular economy. And they are working as well to redesign the city, and for example, doing it throughout innovation. So they are really pushing on startup and trying to use the public procurement phase to scale up the solution proposed from the startup. This is an approach that there is also in Barcelona, for example. I mean, to identify the key challenges of the city and then trying to find solution throughout open innovation challenge in startup, and then once the solution are identified, try to scale them up. And I guess this is the last example about London. Them as well are working on this approach, trying to implement throughout their key activities. So the building to recover the material at the end of the building, try to implement this criteria of circularity in all the new initiative, etc. So at each city, it has different approaches to circularity, but the approach behind is pretty much the same. And it's important to note that although the company, the institution, the customer, each of them approach in a different perspective, the key pillars, the key vision behind is always the same. It's really about decoupling what we do from the consumption of new resources. Just a couple of slides to close about, because we have spoken much about what others are doing. Just wanted to share also what Enel is doing. And on this, the first step is about, of course, reduce our emissions. So this is an important step because each company has to start from their core business in implementing circularity and sustainability. So we have a strong commitment on reducing our emission. I mean, reducing by 80% in the next 10 years, more or less, and to be completely decarbonized in 2050. And to do this in a circular economy perspective. So trying really to redesign whatever we do. So, for example, also our impact on materials. And to do this, we are working with our suppliers. So with our procurement, we are measuring the circularity of what we buy and collaborating with our suppliers to find a new solution. This is important because find a new circular solution is not just the task of the suppliers. It also implies that we have to reconsider our requirements in order to allow suppliers to find new solutions. We are implementing circular economy on our key assets because we are developing many new plants, wind plants, photovoltaic plants, electric recharging station, smart grid, etc. And we plan circularity ahead in order to realize this new infrastructure in a circular economy perspective from the beginning, because I said that a few slides ago, you need first of all to address in the design phase, and then there is the Enel that the division that is working for the final customer, that has a really strong focus on circularity and above all on circular cities. So they are really working worldwide in many cities, developing projects related to circularity. So of course electric vehicles, for example, but as well our recharging station are made from reused plastic. I mean, trying really to connect all the aspect of circularity in everything they do. And the other point I wanted to mention is about cities. We are focusing on it through Enel, of course, but more in general, we are collaborating with many cities worldwide in really trying to understand what can be our contribution in a broader perspective. Because as well, for the transition of city, we are covering an important part, because we are in the energy production, the mobility, in all the final use. But to find a more impacting solution, you also need to collaborate not only with institutions, but as well with other sectors that are part of the city life, trying to integrate and scale up all the solution and all the impacts. I could stop here, because anyhow we have already touched many topics, and I could leave if there is questions or doubts or intervention about the topic that we just mentioned. I guess the question should be written in the chat. What about materials that we cannot stop consuming? Will they ever become circular? Well, yes. I mean, the idea basically, well, first of all, the idea is really to move from consumption to use. So the idea in circular economy is to try to move completely or to renewable sources or to recycled sources. On many material, it is already in this direction. I think, for example, to copper, to steel, on this material, there are already quite high level of recycling. The real issue is not the material, but the design behind, because you need to have products that allow to recover these materials. If they are not designed accordingly, then it's difficult to do it. So the issue is really about how these products are designed, and we have already important example in this direction, because, for example, the Nike with the shoes, but as well on smartphones, there are projects to design smartphones that are completely reusable. Another important aspect is, for example, the modularity, because maybe if you want a new feature in your smartphone, you have to throw away the current one and buy a new one. If the design of the smartphone were modular, I mean that you can replace just a piece of it, you could upgrade it without replacing the whole. I mean, there are many solutions actually ongoing, and the idea is to have our products circular. Then, of course, the circularity maybe could not be 90, could be not 100%, but the point is really to achieve a level of circularity pretty high, because you need to achieve value, 90% or stuff like this, because if we go back to the example of the can we saw at the beginning, can has a life cycle, weeks, months. So if every time you lose 50% of the material, after 1 year, you have already lost everything. So you really need to achieve high level of circularity, and through design is how this is implementing. For example, what can we use to substitute concrete to build bridges or skyscrapers? This is an interesting question. Actually, there are many pilots, let me say, using wood. For example, there are, I'm not sure about skyscraper, but pretty high building that are being tested using wood, and wood is tested as well for some industrial application. So there is on one side, they are working on trying to replace material, replace material with natural material. Then, of course, you have also to see how the wood is produced. But this is one way to replace material, moving always to natural material that can have important performances. The other one is to trying to make close the loop of the concrete. Try to understand, we need to introduce this amount of concrete, but we can recover the concrete at the end of the life. So this is what is happening basically with the copper, for example. You have a huge amount of copper already in the system, but you try not to throw it away, but to have a high level of recovery. So basically, to try to completely move to a circular economy approach, you need to push towards renewable sources, recovery of the material in use, and of course there will be a part of new material that will be introduced in the system, but this should be decreased much more compared to today's levels. I hope I have answered. As a consumer, I ask, what if a person cannot afford to be sustainable? Sometimes it's very expensive. Yeah, this is a point. The point is actually, to be sustainable should be more expensive or not? Well, personally, I think not. The solution should be competitive, and this can be achieved redesigned from the beginning. Because generally the point it is that to make sustainable product, it is done as the company, let me say, does the product in the old way and then adds something on. And in this way, of course, you cannot be competitive. The point is really trying to redesign the whole value chain, try to find the innovative solution. In some cases, this is competitive because the rationale behind, if you think about it, to better use material, recover the value, move to renewable by itself, they should be competitive, in this sense. So the fact that often sustainable solutions are not competitive could be on one side or related to the fact that are just in the initial phases. So it could be a temporary issue. The other could be that the solution adopted is not the right one, because for this product, it has not been properly innovator designed the whole value chain. If I think, for example, to the car sharing, for example, is an example of a solution that is competitive. Or the local value chain often should be competitive. In other cases, sustainable products are not. But this, I think that basically to scale it up, because if it is not competitive, it will remain something for a few people. To make this real transition about circular economy we mentioned before, it has to be competitive. This is true as well for us, for Enel, for example. We are pursuing circular solution, but we need this solution to be as well competitive. Otherwise, of course, you lose your competitivity compared to other companies that do not do it. So circularity needs to be competitive, definitely, as well, because also the name circular economy implies the concept of economic competitive behind. Well, there are many choices. Of course, you can have. You can consider what you buy. About the food, for example. You can move to local value chain to use an electric vehicle instead a traditional one. So there are, of course, you cannot be totally. Of course, you do not can let me say. Verify everything you buy, what is the whole value chain, etc. But on the main topic, you can anyhow take some decision in one direction or the other. So, for example, the electric mobility is something I choose, or the value chain, the supply you choose. These are already decisions that can somehow push in this direction. When you buy something, to try to consider if it is something that can have a long life, can be repaired, or to buy throwaway stuff. So there are, I would say, some easy decisions that can be made. Then, of course, other that imply the analysis of the value chain, etc., are more complicated and will take time before, as a customer, we will be able to really have a clear picture of what we do. But already with some decision we take, we can already show our focus on the topic or not. The 15-minute city is a big issue. Of course, it's more difficult to do it in a already built city. But this is on one side. You can first. There is one issue is the planning of the city. Often what happens in the city, it is that you have all the shopping center in a place, all the houses in another, all the working places in another. So people are focused to commute. So what Paris is doing, for example, is to creating, supporting, let me say, for example, the fact that there are more distributed shops, so more small shops, more distributed, to create, on one side, they are working as well on digitalization, because some service you can digitalize. For example, speaking about hospital, there is something that is the digital health, that is something as well Enel is working on it, that is about provide some services from remote. That of course is not the recovery, but could be the diagnostic, etc. So in some respect, digitalization can help. On others, planning can help. You can anyhow try to push the city not to be anymore with a dedicated cluster of activity, but to have it more distributed throughout the city. Then, of course, as well in school is an issue, but as well this is something that they are trying to plan and try to optimize. Then, of course, you could not achieve the total 15-minute city concept, and maybe it would not even make sense, because otherwise we would end up everybody living in its own village. The point, I think, that in a city, of course, if you want to go to the football stadium or you want to go to the theater, there will be, of course, one theater. But the real point it is that for the everyday services you need, that could be the shopping, the school, the sporting structure, etc., you could be able to achieve. So even if they will not achieve exactly the 15 minutes, I think that already the push in this direction could be quite important. And this has a further positive impact, that is the fact that if you take away cars from the street, this, from one side, you recover much space for other things, because streets could be for other destination and not for parking cars or for traffic. But as well, you make safer, because if you, for example, in Paris, they are pushing the cycling lane, and this is also a safer way of moving, allow children to get out in the street, elderly people to move. So it really seems a marginal change, but really reshaped the city, because one of the main events that shaped today's city was the introduction of car. Car really reshaped our city. And to move away from it can help to move in the previous direction, because if you think about it, I mean, medieval, Italian middle-aged cities were quite close to the 15-minute concept, of course, because you had to have many services around each neighborhood. Okay, I think that there are no more questions, but these were anyhow really interesting questions, and thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.